Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf. Happy 2026. I'm broadcasting from a Buddhist slash Hindu retreat center in the depths of mountains in the Northeast. I'm not going to say exactly where because Brian doesn't like me to say exactly where I am for security reasons, but if I look high, it's because it's been 5 days of chanting, meditation. It's not a drug, it's just the mind being blissful and peaceful and happy and still. Um, it's an incredible practice to learn how to do Hindu or Buddhist meditation, Vipassana meditation, metta meditation. I don't mean to use jargon, but there are different ways to do it. And just talks about setting intention for 2026. So I've I've been in the mountains, actually in a valley where a meteorite hit millennia ago, and so there's actual different magnetism in the earth here because this meteor is half a mile underground with different kinds of ore, creating a different vibe. It's a vibe of incredible peacefulness. So I see from all my news on my phone, in my computer, that the world continues to go to absolute chaos and catastrophe. But I feel hopeful about 2026 for a number of reasons. But one of them is that I've been steeped for the last 5 days in a tradition, and I haven't changed my religion. It's not a religious thing. It's a philosophy, right? And I think you can take something from all the great philosophies in the world. But the Tibetan specifically, and Tibetan slash Indian philosophies about what this earth is for and what our lives are for has really given me a sense of calm about how horrible the world is right now because many reasons, but Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist slash Tibetan Indian philosophy, I don't want to do it like a kind of dumbed down version of it. I'm just barely a novice learning about it, but it's, basically causes and conditions have brought about this current state on this planet. Karma, plays a role, and also giant cycles of human evolution and planetary evolution play a role. So it's not all down to us. And as someone who's an activist and a warrior, that's actually very relaxing to think about because it doesn't mean we stop fighting at all. In fact, someone pointed out when I said, well, my husband's a soldier, he has a very kind of, we have to fight, fight, fight mindset, which is very inspiring, but also can wear me out anyway, because I'm not, I'm not able to fight so hard, so long without sometimes needing a rest or needing peace. The teacher said, well, one of the great texts of this tradition takes place in the middle of a battlefield. And the Bhagavad Gita, I gather, which I have to reread. But, in the middle of a battlefield, one of the warriors says, I just can't go on. I can't kill, my relatives on the other side of this battlefield, who are the enemies in this fight. And he kind of threw down his weapons. And the whole rest of the narrative is, I believe, Krishna explaining why it's okay, why he has to fight, that's his dharma, but that there are bigger forces at play that we can also rely on. And what we can rely on is, and this is something for people who are listening, I know I have a very Judeo-Christian audience, which I appreciate, also, Muslim, also agnostic and atheist, people from all over the world with different belief systems. But I think all the great religions share this view that if you commit yourself to kindness, which is called bodhicitta, and commit yourself to doing good, which is taking the bodhisattva vow, according to one of the sacred texts, to just keep trying to do good, keep trying to be of benefit to all beings that you encounter, all beings on the planet, all beings in the universe, whether you like them or not, for all your days on this planet, that is a way that we all collectively create conditions for enlightenment and liberation for everyone. Because in this philosophy, we're not, which is very different from Western philosophies, we're not all separate. We're not all individuated with no connection to each other, or really no connection at all if we're enemies, or, we inherit ancestral hatreds. In this tradition, we're all connected, even if we're enemies. We're all connected. And Jesus said something very much like this. Remember when one of his disciples said, Master, here's your mother, and here are your brothers and sisters. And he said, who are my brothers and sisters, right? Aren't the people who are joining with me emotionally and spiritually my brothers and sisters? It's good to be reminded that we're all connected, because the algorithms, play on the notion of difference and separation. The algorithms in our phones, which become the algorithms in our minds, right? And so we construct a reality in which we're also separate and we're just in combat with each other. So it is very peaceful and relaxing to be bathed in a philosophy in which we're not separate, and we can do good wherever we are, even if it seems overwhelming. And look at this view. I'm just going to turn it around so you can see what's outside the window. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a gorgeous snowy mountaintop. And, being in nature so completely is also very, very healing. And so I've made some kind of New Year's wishes and commitments for myself. And one of them is I'm going to structure, texts and emails and social media so that they're not kind of afflicting my brain so continually. My brain needs peace, and your brain probably needs peace also. And we can't think our deep thoughts and tune into the poetry of the universe or of our own lives if we're being constantly interrupted. Especially because the interruptions on social media, especially, are designed algorithmically to annoy us or alienate us or depress us or irritate us or cause us to, something else that is aversive or not a good idea in the Buddhist and Hindu tradition is, or cause us to grasp and to want and to, I want that outfit, I want that house, I want that, those things on Etsy, right? That's my, Pinterest and Etsy are my special vices. Both of those things kind of create what they call monkey mind, distract you from that stillness and depth and peacefulness that is your state, that is most generative and most what is the word? Where you're most yourself, because you carry what they call Buddha nature. And again, every religion has a version of this, Christ consciousness, right? In Judaism, it's that spark of the divine, the Shekhinah, right? The feminine aspect of God. We carry that, and it's so easy to lose it or to feel overwhelmed, or just like nothing we do will matter. So anyway, thank you so much to this beautiful retreat center. And I've been doing Qigong for the first time in my life, and it's been very, very, very helpful. And now I will switch gears and tell you about Zohran Mamdani's inauguration, which, even though I just gave an intro, which is like, chill out, it's all fine, the world is vast. In fact, what's going on in New York is absolutely terrifying on a more micro level. The other thing I want to say before I dive into my analysis of Zohran Mamdani's inauguration, and please remember that I'm a former political consultant to the Clintons and to the Gore team. So I'm very familiar with iconography, like political iconography, is that we had an astrologer give a presentation in the program where I am located. And the astrologer read the chart of the United States of America. He was a wonderful astrologer named, I will have to come back to you with his name because I'm in such a Zen state, I can't even retrieve it. But he showed the chart of the United States. Like, countries have births and lifespans just like humans do. And our country was born, most scholars agree, and the chart that he showed us was 5:10 p.m. on July 4th, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and he showed that the planets. He kind of taught us how to read an astrological chart, which is pretty interesting. I've seen them before, and I've never been able to make hide nor hair of them, or heads or tails, I should say, of them. But he taught us how to read it, and he showed us that the planets kind of aligned at the time of the birth of the nation exactly the way they did in 1861, which was the start, of course, of the bloody Civil War that lasted for 4 years in the United States. And also, they are the exact same alignment that are coming our way in 2026. So it's either a rebirth or a disintegration. Like, unfortunately, it doesn't say which, right? But there's going to be either a rededication or a reconfiguration of the United States, or a test, a great, great test, the way that the Civil War was a great, severe test of the United States in 2026. The other thing he explained is that 2026 is called Fire Horse Year. And you have to imagine a horse on fire. It's going to be racing toward us. Nothing can stop it. If we thought that 2025 was crazy and, bizarre, and AI and, machine learning and everything out of control, and robots and, DNA in our bodies and so on, mRNA, 2026 is going to be tenfold that, like, things happening so fast and so irrevocably that we can't even process the changes. So unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly the shape that this test will take in America in 2026. But, I guess prayer really matters. Dedicating ourselves to the well-being of all really matters. And so kind of get your house in order, and pray a lot and walk in faith. All the great astrologers have been saying the same thing. Things are going to go absolutely crazy. Don't worry, stay calm, stay focused, do good, stay peaceful. But it's going to be some crazy times. And we don't know for sure what shape the United States will be in when this year is over. But there were also some really good instructions, like write a letter setting intentions for 2026, and then read it at the end of 2026 and kind of thank the year that passed. So I did set some intentions, and I don't know, I'm feeling hopeful about this year. I feel like it's much harder in 2026 to enslave all the populations of the world the way they were clearly planning to in 2021. It's harder. People have woken up. People are, massive protests in Iran, calling for the end of the extremist fundamentalist regime, calling for the Shah to come back, which is pretty mind-blowing. Of course, legacy media isn't covering that, which is weird and makes you wonder who is funding legacy media, right? Because it's a big story. Independent media is all over it, but legacy media is not. Massive protests in Europe for sovereignty, for freedom, for closed borders, which, is, as you know, I believe, obviously integral to sovereignty. Very strong support in our country for sovereignty, closed borders, having a nation of our own with a citizenry of our own. And I think ordinary people are ordinary, right? Non-elite people are much, much more aware now than they were of the dangers of, I think it's going to be hard to herd people into the, what is it? The digital ID, which the globalists have been wanting for so long. It'll be harder. People know what it means. They know what the dangers are. You're not going to be able to roll out a story like, well, this will make it more convenient when you're shopping, or, there's a health issue, someone has a flu, and so you need to have a digital ID. I don't think that's going to work at all. Anywhere. Things are scary for sure. In China, it does work. People are sleeping on the street because their social credit score is so low that their digital ID doesn't work for anything, and they've been debanked and dehoused and kicked out of university and so on. So there are chunks of the world where these evildoers have succeeded. But other chunks they were counting on, like Western Europe, I think are proving to be harder to enslave than they planned in 2020, 2021. We'll see what the future holds, but everywhere I go, like, I'm so used to being reviled, when people find out that I got canceled for warning about lockdowns and the injection and so on. But in the last little while, wherever I go, I have nothing but support from people, across the political divide, from people of all backgrounds. And that's less about me than about a shift in consciousness that I think the whole world has gone through. So we'll see, but, God willing. But definitely, if you're praying, keep praying. Turns out it really matters. If you're meditating, keep meditating. If you're giving charity, keep giving charity. If you're serving your community and drawing people together, that turns out to be everything we need. And may I personally beg for you, especially if you're a parent in 2026, put down the phone and have your children put down the phone. And if you can't get them to put down the phone, I found out that you can stop screen time with something called screen time on your child's iPhone, and use it, or my driver who drove me up here from a car service said that he actually went to the Verizon store when he got his daughter's phone and said to the Verizon people, can you turn it off from, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. when she's in school, turn it on for 3 hours, 3 to 6, and then turn it off again at 6 for dinner time and homework time. And they could. Have you even heard that? I'm in the tech business. In my whole life, I've not heard that that was a possibility. But now you know. So if you're a parent, go to Verizon or AT&T or whatever when you get your child's phone and ask for that service. Turn off the phones. Okay, that's our job in 2026. Turn them off. Turn to your neighbor and chat with him or her. Turn to your child and talk to your child. Like, literally, when you're up here and you're, meditating and doing the sound baths and chanting and all the things, you really pick up more on collective energy. And I was in a community where for the last 5 days, people were not using their phones. And it was so full of joy when we sat at meal times, because our energy, our intention is all together, connected to one another. Whereas, now I'm kind of reacclimating, people are coming and going from the outer world and everyone's on their phones. And I feel it like before, when no one was on their phones, it was like a beautiful, warm pool of human consciousness. And each of us was pouring our streams or drops of consciousness into this warm, lovely collective pool that we were all bathing in. And now, with people on their phones and some people not on their phones, it's like it's like someone on their phone feels like a shard of broken glass in the collective consciousness. And you're walking through broken glass, or you're trying to swim through broken glass. And everyone on their phone is like their consciousness is broken or interrupted in the collective. And it occurred to me, feeling this, that that's what they wanted. The people who addicted us to these technologies, they wanted that breaking of the incredible power of human connection, human souls in communion all together. That's why they shut the churches and synagogues and mosques. I'm persuaded of it, because that flowing together is so transformational, so powerful, so healing. So that's my little preamble. Now let's talk about Zohran Mamdani's inauguration. I'm going to share the screen. I was pretty struck. I don't want to share the entire screen. No, I don't want to do that. I may not be able to share the screen with you. I'm going to stop the screen and try it again. I'm going to share the screen, allow to share screen, and it gives me share entire screen, and I don't want to do that. All right, I'm having a tech problem, probably exacerbated by the fact that no, I don't want you to see my whole screen. I'm going to stop sharing the whole screen, stop the screen. I'm going to try one more time. Allow to share window, is that what they mean? Share this window. Nope, don't want that either. All right, guys, forgive me. I'm going to stop the screen. I'm going to verbally tell you what's on my mind. I looked at Mamdani's inauguration. He was just inaugurated at midnight with his wife, the Syrian artist. And they're, you know, a lovely, telegenic couple, young. Um, and I've mentioned before that, you know, Zohran Mamdani's mom is a filmmaker, a famous filmmaker, and a very talented filmmaker. And I've mentioned before that I feel like she, or a theatrical, you know, someone familiar with theatricality, was stage managing Mamdani's appearances because they were so cinematic. And I specifically said, look at what he's wearing, because, which is very important. Again, I used to do that I used to talk about imagery for Gore 2000 and for Clinton's reelection campaign. And political imagery is very important. It's, you know, Jung knew that our collective unconscious operated with symbols and archetypes. And when a leader, especially, can tap the power of symbolism, uh, all kinds of things become possible. And so, what I asked you all to note is that he was dressed as if it was 1962. You know, that dark suit, the dark narrow tie, the haircut, you know, a very Kennedy-esque, but like Robert Kennedy, right? Uh, Very Kennedy-esque look. And that was clever because it taps that memory we have as Americans of this idealistic time, a time when new ideas, new policy ideas are being uh, rolled out. There's more emphasis on equality uh, and drawing people into, you know, to society who had been marginalized or had been ostracized. So it's kind of a brilliant choice. But you notice he like literally didn't change his suit for the entire duration of his campaign. It was clever. It was a trademark. Uh, but you barely saw Mrs. Mamdani. And so now at the inauguration, you see Zohran Mamdani and Mrs. Mamdani, and you see that she is wearing a really interesting, very chic brown coat that is a long, tailored, fitted coat with a flared skirt, and like 3 rows of fur or some sort of fuzzy material of some kind. And take a look online at what I'm describing. So, why did this immediately terrify me? You also, if you see images that pan out, you can see that all of the women in the crowd, and yes, it's very cold. It's midnight in New York City, you know, on January 1st, or perhaps the first into the second. But the women are also wearing these long, fitted, flared, colored coats. Now, the reason I really reacted to this is that is not a normal fashion right now. And it wasn't a normal fashion in 2020 when, like, it's a very unusual thing. You don't see women in long fitted flared cloth coats typically right now in human time. It's not a fashion. Um, Other things are a fashion, but that's not a fashion. But if you think back to 2020, all of the all of the key women, Mrs. Biden, a number of, you know, AOC, a number of other, Nancy Pelosi, a number of women, if you go back to that imagery, were wearing bright, fitted, long cloth coats that flared at the bottom. And they often had 2 rows of buttons. Well, what is that? That kind of coat is a military style of coat, specifically, um, you know, end of the 19th century Russian, or, you know, the Nazis loved a coat like that. Honestly, they did. The Nazis liked that coat. But it's militant, it's militaristic, and it's communist or national socialist. It's totalitarian, is what I should say. There's not a regime after 1850 in the West or in North America where anyone wore that coat that was not a leader in a totalitarian society, especially a militaristic leader in a totalitarian society. Stalin wore coats like that, not brightly colored, obviously, but that style of military coat. All right. So when I saw Mrs. Mamdani's brown coat, which I do dearly wish I could show you, I'm going to try one more time. Allow to share screen. They won't let me do it. So I will stop. I will cancel. Um, click the screen icon in your address bar. All right, I'm not going to do that now. When I saw that, I realized we're in for some serious trouble, because the people who orchestrated and stage managed the. Would you like me to sit somewhere else, or you're good?
Oh, I'm totally good as long as you don't mind the interruptions. Yeah.
The people who stage managed this incoming administration stage managed the last administration. It's the same producers. And since it's the same producers, and so much evidence has emerged that, foreign entities meddled in our affairs in 2020 to 2024, you can expect the same foreign entities to meddle in New York's affairs from 2026 on to the end of the Mamdani regime. It's very, very bad news. Now, there were other things about Zohran Mamdani's symbolism. And let me tell you, as a former political consultant, these things are not accidental. So much thought goes into what is, the First Lady of New York going to wear? What's the candidate going to wear, or the mayor-elect? What's the lighting going to look like? What language does he use? What do the speechwriters say? And so none of this is accidental. So there were other cues in the inauguration that signaled that the same cast of characters is in charge. For example, in his speech, he contrasted rugged individualism, which he used as a negative, with the warm embrace of collectivism. Now, I don't know how much, communist history you've read, but it's time to brush up on communist history, because that is literally a communist mission statement, an anti-Western, I think the word capitalist is used too carelessly. Um, Individualism is associated with capitalism, but it's really a Western concept, right? It's been a Western concept since the Greeks. The role of the individual, the importance of the individual, it reached a peak in the Western Renaissance. The Enlightenment celebrated the individual as opposed to the collective. Now, and that was the great innovation of Western philosophy. And it's such a great innovation that people around the world, it hasn't stayed in the West. People around the world like constitutions that ensure individual rights. They like to have individual rights. It's an incredible innovation in human history. It's a beautiful innovation in human history. But the people who don't like individualism are communists. Like, who else doesn't like individualism, right? Communists. You could say socialists, but what Mamdani is already doing is kind of blurring socialism into communism. And there's really like a hair's breadth of difference depending on what you're talking about between the two terms these days. And a lot of communist societies think of themselves as socialist. For instance, the USSR, the acronym is Soviet Socialist, right? They thought they were socialists. The Nazis thought they were socialists. National Socialists, that's the origin of that term, and so on. So, but collectivism, the word, is a communist word. It's a Stalinist word. It's a word that goes back to the Russian Revolution. They created collectives. That's what it was, collectivism. The earliest iteration of communism after the revolution that brought the czars to an end was the collectivization of society. That's what it was called. That's the core term of what is underway when in that case, a monarchy or a feudal society is broken through a revolution and turns into a communist society. But it's also collectivization is what happens when a capitalist society or an individualist society is broken or overthrown and turned into a communist society. Collectivization, I can't stress it enough. And there's nothing nice historically about the collective. I know it's been rebranded, especially to young people. It sounds awfully cozy, especially kids who grew up on social media where they're surrounded by consciousnesses like a collective, a group. And also the way that communism is taught these days, especially in expensive liberal arts schools and Ivies, the horrors of communism are really downgraded, and the horrors of capitalism are really showcased, and the benefits of individualist societies, human rights, rule of law, rights for women, rights for gay people, and so on, they're not explained anymore as being an outflow, which they are, of individualist societies. The downside of individualist societies, the fact that yes, in a totally individualistic society, some people have more unequal resources and assets than others. That is true. Before you had Social Security, elders went to workhouses, or children couldn't go to school because they were working mines and at the loom in the cotton mill. All of that is true, but we've got a generation that has heard only about the horrors of individualism and not about the beauty of a system that gives every single person rights, and on the basis of that understanding that every single person has rights as an individual, and our Constitution says the individual is endowed by God with certain inalienable rights, right? As a result of that, reform can happen. And I'm a big fan of reform, because when you reform a system where children are working at a loom, or can't go to school, or being sent down into the mines because their hands are tiny and they can do things with their hands that adults can't do. When you reform a system, you have much more humane outcomes, and you don't lose the liberty, right? But there's a whole generation of kids now, and they're Mamdani voters, young people, who have not been taught how precious liberty is and how much went into our having the liberties that we have in the West and in the United States. Liberties that people around the world, again, they're not Western, around the world, people want the same liberties. They want, women want equal rights. They want to go to school. They want to be able to own property. They want to be able to not lose custody of their kids in a divorce, right? They want to not be beaten. They want to not be raped. LGBTQ people, that's not a term. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, Q is too amorphous. That's the subject of another podcast. But, they don't want to be imprisoned. They don't want to be tortured the way they are in Egypt. They don't, like, all over many parts of the world, you can be imprisoned for sodomy if you're a gay man. Lesbianism doesn't have the same kinds of penalties, but it's not good. So all over the world, people want the rights and the liberties that were developed in the West. But we've got a horrible deficit in that Mamdani came to power, I believe, fraudulently, and I'll post the receipts for that shortly. But nonetheless, lots of people supported him, and especially his own generation of young people who have seen nothing positive and been taught nothing positive about the individualist capitalist West. They've been taught the downsides, the negatives, and they're certainly experiencing the downsides. I don't want to minimize that. They can't buy a house because it's the down payment is so astronomically out of the reach of people working hard. Most of half of America lives paycheck to paycheck, and young people trying to just buy a house can't do it now the way they used to be able to do it in the early 60s, for instance, on one income. They've got crippling student debt. They see, going to a bar is so expensive. There's nowhere else to meet people. Like it's such an alienating world for young people. So Mamdani, swept in with a message that really resonated with a lot of those young adults. And here he is, our first communist mayor of a major city, and a city that happens to be the financial center of the world, or certainly of the United States. So some other cues, in addition to the very formal statement that he's, siding with the collective rather than the individual. I'll get to the additional cues in a minute, but what I really want you to know is that having been present for the writing of any number of speeches of both President Clinton, Mrs. Clinton, and Vice President Gore. Nothing in a speech is an accident, and every important speech, like a State of the Union, but certainly an inaugural speech, a speech, an event like, tear down, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, the speech when at a national disaster like the Challenger disaster, those speeches, but especially inaugural speeches and State of the Union speeches, they have in the middle of them a mission statement, a statement of principles, and everything, and that's the candidate or the candidate-elect's way of saying, from this statement of principles, all my policies are going to flow. And so you really need to pay attention when they roll that out, because it means you're going to see that theme replicated over and over and over in talking points and in appointments and of staffers and heads of agencies and in executive actions, right? And so his mission statement is, I'm a communist and New York is a communist city. We're going to collectivize it. Okay. Individual rights do not have the weight that they used to, and it is the era of the collective. So pay attention. You heard it here. Other people are saying it too, but I'm drilling it down into you, because when he like surfaced that dialectic, he was really creating an opposition. Here's the individual. That's the past. We hate it. Blech. Who needs the individual? That was really secretly cruel to, have individualism, rugged individualism. He really didn't like that. And, we're going to wrap you in the warm embrace of the collective. Oh my God. So let me talk about a policy he's rolled out already. So one of the very first actions of Mamdani's administration to be, right, even before he had formally been inaugurated, his city council rolled this out with his blessing. It's a new law, and it should scare everyone to death, whether they live in New York or not. And it is a law that takes your property if you own property in New York, and it's a housing, sorry, and it's an executive order targeting landlords. All right, and so what he did was he said, okay, if you own a multi-unit, or his city council with his blessing, if you own a multi-unit property in New York, even if it's just 2 units, right, a townhouse, of which there are many thousands in New York, doesn't matter if you want to sell it. You can't just put it on the open market anymore. You can't put it on the open market if you're pressed and you need to turn it around fast. You bought a new home, you don't have a lot of money. Too bad. You can put it on the open market. You can't put it on the open market. You have to file paperwork telling the city that you want to sell it. At that point, NGOs, pay close attention to this, non-government organizations, nonprofits, get to step in and see if they want that property and bid for it. And they can take up to 120 days to do that. And that's 3, 6, 9, 12. That's 4 months. All right. And you can't, as a result, have a bidding war, right when the market is hot. You have to wait 4 months. Only if the NGOs don't want it can you then take it onto the open market. Well, there are a lot of reasons this is absolutely terrifying. And I'm going to ask you not to, zone out while I explain it, because it affects you. Because there are, like, how can I put it? The hatchet is at the root of the tree of property ownership in North America, not just in New York, but also in Canada. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But what it means is, think about it. A lot of the landlords in New York are not giant corporations. They're not BlackRock or Vanguard. A lot of the property owners in New York are immigrants or single moms like I used to be, who scrimped and saved and worked multiple jobs because they knew that that along with college, right, for their kids, was a critical way to have upward mobility in the American economy, was to own property, and ideally a rental property. So they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. I know so many cab drivers who worked 12-hour days, because I always chat with my cab drivers, and many of them worked so hard so they could buy that rental property. And they're really proud of it, as they should be. It takes a lot of work to buy a rental property. And that rental property is supposed to give them and their families an income, passive income, and help pay for their kids' college and be a source of security in their retirement. And that's how the system worked in, evil capitalism, right? In New York until recently. Well, so if you're a small landlord, or you're a cab driver, a single mom like I was, who did the same thing, scrimped and saved, went without to have that one rental property so that I would, because I am a writer and I didn't have, a pension or a retirement, anything, right? It was just on me. You don't have the wherewithal to keep a property empty for 4 months or waiting for a buyer for 4 months, because you're still paying the mortgage. Right? And a property has to be empty before you can sell it. So New York experimented with this before. There was a horrible 6-month period in the pandemic when Governor Andrew Cuomo said, oh, actually it was the CDC, which, why are they even involved in, local decisions like this? They said, because of the pandemic, you can't evict your tenants for 6 months. And I've told this anecdote before, but it's really worth repeating. And what that did, think about it, it doesn't particularly do anything to a pandemic to keep people from leaving their apartments. You're not going to infect a new neighborhood more than you infected an old neighborhood. But by saying you can't evict your tenants, for 6 months, what this did was it meant that small landlords who were living, rent payment by rent payment to pay their mortgages couldn't afford to hold on to their properties. And I will never forget the day, but BlackRock could afford it. The big developers who had millions of dollars to help them wait it out, they could afford it. So this resulted in a massive wealth transfer in 1 week in January of, I think, 2021 or 2022. I think 2021. And it was shocking to witness. And if you go to Zillow, which tracks, sales in all over the country, but also New York real estate sales, you'll see that there was, around January 15th of that year, there was a dramatic drop, like a 20 to 30% drop in the value of all of these properties that were for sale. Why? Because that was the end of the 6-month period. It was January 1st, and they, landlords needed 2 weeks to finally evict the tenant that hadn't been paying any rent, paint the house or the apartment, put it on the market, and sell it at fire sale prices. Fire sale prices. And that's what happened. They had to slash the selling price of those apartments in order to survive. They couldn't hold on to them. And so who came in and scooped them up at a 30% discount or a 20% discount? BlackRock and Vanguard and the big developers. And so that's why you see this massive, massive wealth transfer. And also, I must note, Chinese and Russian money. A lot of money laundering goes into properties in America and in Canada and in London from those countries. And they also came in and bought up a lot of those bargains. So what this law will do, let's tease out one more level. NGOs. It kind of sounds nice. Oh, the NGOs can see if they want it for affordable housing. Well, Sam Antar, who's a former CFO of Crazy Eddie and who was busted for fraud and became a whistleblower and now exposes fraud, he wrote a really important essay showing how municipal governments like New York's fund NGOs, certain NGOs, nonprofits, who then help to turn out the vote and launder millions of dollars, right, of donor money. And then they help to elect a candidate who's part of the same machine, who then sends millions of dollars in city money through grants to these NGOs. And he broke this story before the Somali fraud story in Minnesota was broken, before the frauds in Ohio and Seattle and across the country, using this methodology were broken. So now think, which NGOs are going to get to buy New York real estate? Only the favored ones. It's not going to be, my friend Jimmy Wagner's Donald J. Trump Republican Club in Brooklyn, right? It's not going to be, NGOs who are not doing the bidding of this machine, right? It's going to be NGOs who are in the business of perpetuating this machine. And by the way, people who live in these communities see right through this. I mean, the candidates I worked with in the last election running for city council, Black and Hispanic candidates running as Republicans for city council, they're like, these NGOs don't want to solve homelessness. They don't want to solve drug addiction. They want to perpetuate it so that the money will keep flowing and flowing in this circle of corruption and fraud. Well, those are the NGOs who are going to get those first dibs, or who will just sit there and wait and tie the poor landlord up in paperwork for 4 months until the landlord is forced to go on the market, having drastically reduced the price of that property, and then BlackRock and Vanguard swoop in to snatch it up. So that's a massive intervention in property rights. Whether you are a Democrat or Republican and independent like I am, that's communism. Communism is defined, among other definitions, as the state control of resources and the state control of the economy. And there is nothing more directly illustrative of state centrally planned economy, is what it's called. There's nothing more characteristic of a centrally planned economy than what I just described to you. That the city saying, no, you can't with your own property. Now, the reason I mention this is that British Columbia is going the same way. Very interestingly, that attack on property rights is being brought about by, we've been saying thank you to the Chippewa, thank you to the Muskogee Nation, thank you to, I acknowledge that I'm on whatever land, and then you acknowledge, it's called land acknowledgements. And these started to become popular just a few years ago. And I really paid attention to them because I thought the wording is not organic. It's wonderful to acknowledge that people lived here before European settlers came. I would say that if you know anything about history, people lived here before those people came, and people lived here before those people came. And, the nature of living on this planet is waves of population, being territorial, taking over, and building cultures and civilizations. But it's a lovely thing to do, theoretically. However, the inorganic nature of it is, I acknowledge this is their land. That is a legal statement. That is a statement that sets the stage for a legal claim. You acknowledge this is our land. You acknowledge this is our land. You said it in writing, right? Okay, it's our land. And that's what you're starting to see in British Columbia, is Native people saying, okay, you've acknowledged it's our land, hand it over. And again, I'm a big believer in, if treaties were violated, make the treaties right, pay people, like reparations, like I believe in that, right? But this is not that. It's another Marxist intervention in property rights using, I think, Native tribes as proxies. And in this case, I think Marxism has come to New York using radical Islam as a proxy. So now the last couple of things I want to talk about before I take your questions. And there are tons of comments. That's really nice. And yeah, lots of comments. So you will own nothing and be happy. We heard that during COVID scan. Absolutely right, Frank Brescia. And you are acknowledging the Yeah, the stolen land phrase, right? I mean, that's very interesting, and it's used in just some parts of the world. This is stolen land, that's stolen land. Colonial settler colonialism is another phrase that's used about Israel, for example. But again, I would say you've got to read history, read deeply into history everywhere, including Palestine, Israel, Gaza, Syria, Jordan, Wisconsin, England, Ireland, Scotland. Anywhere you look, anywhere you stick a pin on a map, you could say the people who are there are settler colonizers because they're taking the place of other people who were there earlier. So it's a nonsensical term. And yes, definitely children are saying, and there's a curriculum apparently that they're getting in Minnesota and maybe other states, that says, oh, it's stolen land, it's stolen land. Well, that opens up a very gigantic can of worms. I mean, I believe in not erasing the history of the tribes who were here. We owe so much to them. A lot of the conquest of this nation was by force. And I'm not downplaying it, and treaties should be honored, as I said, but a lot of the conquest of everywhere, including the wars of tribes against tribes, was by force. And that's the nature of conquest. And there's also, I have noticed, lies being told. For instance, California was purchased bit by bit from the people who owned it in the 19th century, who were Spanish ranchers and Mexican ranchers. They were the aristocracy in California. And when I went out to California recently and I toured a 19th century fort, I was very surprised, or, displays about the gold rush. I was very surprised to see terms like colonizers or colonial and colonizers, because whatever you may think about the gold rush, they weren't colonizing, and whatever you may think about the first settlers in California, the Anglos bought land from the people who had colonized, who were the Spanish, who had come over in the 16th century to colonize, right? So the story that is being told, I mean, there's just been an effort in San Francisco to give $5 million in reparations to Black Americans in San Francisco. So I do actually believe in reparations, but California was never a slave state. The people who were the enslaved or laborers were Chinese in California. And so there's like this fake or a non-historical victim oppressor dialectic being rolled out inaccurately over vast swaths of North America, where it's not even historically accurate to say it, and where the real history is one of purchase. Like the Louisiana Purchase was a purchase, right? We purchased from France, we purchased from Spain. It's much more complicated than quote unquote stolen land. So let's keep going. Let's say a land blessing. That's really funny. So those are really dramatic interventions. And the last thing I want you to notice with the inauguration is the Quran. Now, Mamdani his dad is Muslim, his mom is Hindu, but he has every right to swear on a Quran. That in itself, is a First Amendment freedom of worship thing. We should be all for freedom of worship, whatever shape it takes. But some of the things he has done are very dramatic in terms of his appointment, and signaling that he's going to be creating a dialectic, again, communist versus individualist or capitalist, and also, unfortunately, fundamentalist Islam or radical Islam versus Jews in Israel. And to me, this is heartbreaking because as a New Yorker, it's been the place where everyone can be a New Yorker. We don't divide on the basis of religion. We don't divide on the basis of, we may have arguments about, Israel and Palestine, but we are above all New Yorkers. Well, he's creating a dynamic using the state to endorse really one religion over another and one political ideology over another. And that has never happened in this way in New York before, bringing kind of a global conflict to a municipal level. There have been other bad things mayors have done in the past, but no one's ever done this. It's like bringing Northern Ireland and, Catholic versus Protestant fights in Ireland to New York with an Irish mayor, and then empowering one side with the power of the state, right? It's very dangerous. So one story I'm reading from ABC News is that one Mamdani appointee resigned. This was December 18th, so even before he was inaugurated, over social media posts she made more than a decade ago that featured anti-Semitic tropes. So this is Catherine Almonte da Costa, who had been tapped to join the incoming administration, and posts dated back 10 years were shared online by the ADL, which is a pretty radical kind of Jewish Defense League, and they're anti-Semitic. And it's quite interesting that this article doesn't quote them, and that is weird, but she expresses deep regret for them, and she was in charge of his Office of Appointments to choose who would serve on the administration. So that's a pretty big deal. So she stepped aside, but as a former political consultant, you've got to understand that they get vetted, and so he knew that even if she had to step aside, that story would play out. And so he's signaling, I'm willing to choose someone like this to be in charge of everyone who's selected to serve in my administration. It's a signal. Another really interesting thing I want to note is that hundreds of people waited at the Brooklyn Bridge for fireworks that never came because of AI fake news saying there would be fireworks on the Brooklyn Bridge, and there were no fireworks. Now, that may seem trivial, but it's not, because fireworks are a New York tradition on New Year's Eve and the 4th of July. And I don't know who made the AI, but New Year's has been a focus in Europe, especially, of kind of radical Muslim targeting of traditions in the West. And the fact that some country would bother creating an AI narrative that would lead thousands and thousands of New Yorkers to stand on the Brooklyn Bridge at midnight in the cold, waiting for fireworks that never came, I think it's very telling, because I think we're going to see more and more and more of this targeting of New York's iconography. Let's change the Big Apple to, the big bunch of grapes, or the big fig or something, right? The Statue of Liberty is too, European. Let's change what she's wearing. Let's take her down. Columbus, the Statue of Columbus. Let's get rid of that. I'm kind of making things up, but if you look at Europe and the United States, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they took down a whole row, a street of, Charlottesville, Virginia, a whole street of statues, because they were politically incorrect, historical statues, or the Pocahontas statue that was removed because she was, kneeling and the men were standing, right? So you could do a plaque saying this is Pocahontas, right? Some people don't like that she's kneeling, but they just got rid of it. So you're seeing this across Europe, the burning of churches, right? The targeting of Christmas markets. I've talked about this endlessly. You're going to keep seeing it in New York under Zohran Mamdani to wipe out what is New York about New York. And the last thing I want to mention is he also chose a lawyer who has been supportive of defending people who targeted New York. So that's would never happen under normal circumstances. Here we are. I'm looking at Fox News. Mamdani taps controversial lawyer who defended al-Qaeda terrorist for top role, quote, powerful advocate. So this is Ramzi Qassem, and he also served as top advisor on the White House Domestic Policy Council during the Biden administration. So I'm telling you, you're seeing the same people who are in charge of the Biden administration are in charge of this. I promise you, these people have resurfaced. It's the same talent pool, and you're going to see the same kinds of policies, which is really scary, because it turns out that, the Biden family took $3 million from a, Chinese like intelligence asset. But this is pretty shocking. Ramzi Qassem defended al-Qaeda terrorist Ahmed al-Darbi in court as the city's top attorney. And he was appointing Qassem as New York's chief counsel, the top legal role in the city. So that's like the attorney general of the city. And he's also appointing Stephen Banks as a self-proclaimed social justice attorney. And in 2014, al-Darbi pled guilty before a U.S. military commission to conspiracy in connection with an al-Qaeda terrorist plot to bomb the French oil tanker MV Limburg off the coast of Yemen. One civilian was killed in the attack and several others were injured. He was convicted of the crime in 2017 and was transferred by the Trump administration in 2018 to Saudi Arabia's custody. So this guy is in charge of New York's law. And this quote at the time of the transfer is, "While it may not make him whole, my hope is that repatriation at least marks the end of injustice for Ahmed. He has had 16 long and painful years in captivity." Qassem represented anti-Israel activist and Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil in 2025, who was arrested by ICE for his alleged role in leading anti-Semitic demonstrations on campus. And Khalil has since been released. His legal case is ongoing. Well, this is very big. It's a very big deal that this lawyer is now in charge of the law, what happens legally in New York. It's an incredibly powerful position, and he can create a two-tier justice system in New York, the way England now has a two-tier justice system that is privileging, radical Islamists and imams over people who are not them, or he has the power to, well, and immediately they did this. They got Mamdani's first actions in a city that doesn't have enough school lunches for kids. Not, the infrastructure is terrible. The subways aren't safe. Half of third to eighth graders read below grade level. So many problems, environmental problems, so many things to work on. Elderly people, alone in their apartments, priced out of the city. I mean, crime, like sexual assault, like so many things, homelessness, drug addiction. His first priority, some of the first things that Mamdani did was to get rid of anti-BDS policies left over from the Mayor Adams administration that said, we're not going to buy from contractors who boycott Israel. And you could say that's legitimate, is like America first. But that's one of his first actions. And one of the second actions which is much more worrying, is that he got rid of the definition of anti-Semitism that was used by an international Holocaust remembrance entity, thus kind of weakening the protections of Jews in New York from anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic acts. So it's a very dangerous time to be a New Yorker. I think it's a particularly dangerous time to be Jewish in New York. But that's the iconography that he's choosing. And I think it's very interesting to me that Iran is erupting with calls for freedom and overthrowing the imams, and none of the legacy media is covering it, almost, as I mentioned, and that this iconography and these appointments and the symbolism that Mamdani is choosing is so extreme and scary and radical, especially in a city that suffered so much from radical Islamic terrorism in 9/11. None of the legacy media is covering it in a normal way. Like, these are not normal appointments. This is not normal language. This is communist language. These are specifically appointing people who have a record of, singling out one group for hate speech on social media, or defending like a killer, of an ideologically motivated Islamist killer. And that guy's now in charge of New York law, right? Terrifying. It's like the structure's been laid down in one day. That is terrifying. So that's what I have to say. That's interesting. James Green, our good friend, who always makes such great comments, said, did Robert Oppenheimer indicate this realization when he quoted the Gita at the Trinity test? Say more about that. The world's, I'm a destroyer of worlds, I believe, was the quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And I think you're reacting to, wow. I think you're reacting to my comments earlier about the Bhagavad Gita. This can't be the real David Hogue, but it's an interesting comment. It's a troll. My goodness, when you were a sophomore at Lowell in Mr. Rauschman's English 70H class, you were stuck up to be sure, but you weren't an idiot. What happened to you? Well, that's pretty funny, but also a little bit intimidating because you certainly researched my adolescence. So I don't know how you know all of that, but say more. But I think this moment is kind of a teachable moment that I'm, showcasing a real threat to New York City, and the nature of the comment is a little bit intimidating, personally intimidating. And David Hogue follows up by saying he was elected. Well, was he? I have the receipts on that, and I'll bring them. There were a lot of irregularities in the election. Betsy Dooner says there is not a pure system that can work. Capitalism has been corrupted for a long time. They give voters power. Capitalism can become a monster. That's for sure. We need both. Look, I'll credit that. I mean, the best societies to live in are the ones like Scandinavia used to be, which are capitalist societies with some kind of social welfare systems. I wouldn't call that socialism, though. Those are social welfare systems, like retirement benefits and free education. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah. Betsy Dooner says Trump is making it so people can't afford to live. They're losing property to corporations, and we can honor treaties and remain a strong country. We can have a social system and also have capitalism that is, I think you mean, that is not killing people. Well, certainly, and these are debates to have, right? Like, I miss an American, which we could have these differences of opinion, like what's an ideal society look like? You would, have this kind of social program. I might think, that goes too far. I might want to cut back, especially with the kind of debt we're in. But these are important conversations to have. I don't know if we can have them in a truly communist society, right? And Carol Smith says true freedom costs. When the sun sets, free is free indeed. Can't live free if you're a prisoner holding the keys. You certainly can't live free if you're a prisoner. This is an interesting observation. It's divide and conquer. And yeah, I do think some people are being singled out and targeted in New York, and it's, so un-New Yorkish. You're comical at best, says Hadel Abdel. And guys, I've been in this game a long time, and when personal insults come out, I know I'm over the target. I know there's an important story there. Mamdani can't be president in comparison to Biden, the bought out white old man, as if, why are we being so racist? That showed how big of a Zionist he was, and proof that the cult ideology of Zionism has nothing to do with religion. And what are you a doctor of? Again, it's funny how you speak of yourself in the first person. Yeah, I can't address all of that, but thank you for your comments. Mamdani can be president if the Congress changes the requirements for who's president in our system. And what are you a doctor of again? I am a D.Phil in Victorian poetry from Oxford University. And I don't know what you mean by speaking of myself in the first person. I is a first person case. Okay, wow, lots of trolls. Lots of trolls. It's very interesting. You truly are the doppelganger of the. Okay, this is getting just silly. I'll skip that. And then Carol Smith says we are all looking out a portal on the Titanic. All right. Well, I think we've covered it, you guys. A lot of differences of opinion about this. I'm pretty sure of what I'm seeing. And I agree with Julie Munsterman, who says Trump shook the hand of an ISIS leader and praised him publicly for doing a good job after he was installed as the new head of state of Syria. Who voted for that? I think that's a reasonable observation. I mean, from my experience around, White Houses, often there's a national security reason that we might not even be privy to for why a president might host a former leader of terrorists in the White House. And if you look at, for instance, the IRA, once there was a state in Northern Ireland, once there was a state in the Republic of Ireland, and a political party, Sinn Féin became a political party in Northern Ireland, people who were terrorists were hosted at the White House as well. You can have many examples. Many people consider Netanyahu a terrorist. He was hosted at the White House. Many people consider, Putin a terrorist. He was hosted at the White House. So there are reasonable, national security reasons for doing that. I don't think that's the same as giving someone an administration job managing, the law of New York City at the most senior level. I think it's different. But this has been a robust conversation and I appreciate it. And tell me more of what you think. Tell me what your New Year's wishes are and intentions in the comments. And in the meantime, I want to talk about gold because our sponsor is a precious metal sponsor, American Alternative Assets. So look at the big picture, you guys. Increased tariffs on our trade partners, tax cuts and regulation changes. You've got to learn why gold is a viable diversification tactic now more than ever. You really should consider looking at American Alternative Assets because they will be able to tell you what to do to start an account, whether you have just a little bit of money or a lot of money. To start with, they can advise you about putting your assets or your retirement into gold. And Brian and I both think that times are so unstable that is more important than ever. And if you read the news this morning, silver is being bought up and hoarded, actually. So precious metals have never been more important. If Brian and I often talk about how if we had invested in gold 5 years ago, we would have quintupled our investment, which is pretty shocking, but there's never a bad time to start. So I really encourage you to go to 1-800-CLOUT-GOLD, CLOUTGOLD.com, and ask for a free guide to investing in gold so you can diversify your assets no matter what is happening in the year of the runaway fire horse, 2026. And that's really nice. Demiri Bailey says, great work, Naomi, thanks. It's really sweet. I realized after 5 days of being in such a peaceful environment, the internet is a really horrible place and lots of mean things are said. And maybe we can all redouble our efforts to speak kindly to one another, even if we disagree in 2026. And so we can have like hearts of kindness and be able to have difficult conversations without alienating each other or depressing each other. And I personally, really do feel very burnt out when I read all these hostile, mean comments. And I would just encourage my beloved trolls and harassers to just, make your argument. You don't need to use personal insults to make your argument. It doesn't make you seem smarter. And let me also close with this, because it's a beautiful thing to say. Everyone stay happy and healthy in 2026. God help us all, indeed. And this is also good. Daniel Kahawai says 8 ounces of kindness yet for Old Long Syne. Also a beautiful thing to say. See that the tide is turning toward the people of goodwill and kindness. And Nancy Peck Lucht, one of our favorite friends and extended family members, says, nice to see you again. Happy New Year, Nancy. It's so wonderful to see you, even if virtually. And thank you for being such a good friend to me and keeping my spirits up in difficult times. And you guys, you have to see this beautiful snowfall outside. Let me see if you can see that. No, you can't really see it out the window. It's all whited out, but the snow is just falling and falling. It's going to be very difficult to get back to my room. But it's so beautiful. The world is so beautiful. Let's enjoy it, you guys. Let's make peace in 2026. If you like this kind of journalism and opinion, I really need your support. We really need your support. We're a tiny team of very hardworking people. So go over to Substack, to Outspoken, and become a paying subscriber if you can. Or go over to Daily Cloud and make a donation or become a subscriber. And you guys, you've got to try legisector.com. It's Bill Cam 2.0. Legisector.com is like any state or federal bill in your area of interest or industry. It's an incredible tool, and it took sweat and blood and tears to produce it. So sign up. It's only $11.99 a month, but you will never, ever be taken by surprise by any legislation in any area. You can affect the legislation. You can see top trending bills. You can do it all from your phone. So this was my gift to the world with the help of our wonderful community. Please use it. Go over to legisector.com. Love you guys. Happy New Year. I'll see you, I hope, tomorrow. And yeah, let's pray for New York, everyone. Bye-bye.